very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's
so when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
All these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to like, even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, and like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know abilities. It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's what
victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now,
bizarre that so many people got duped, and I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
It means playing League of Legends while on investor calls. Like at the time, that was seen as this charming, like genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually. Okay, it's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single. Like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they say he called it fiat at FTX? But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. The son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was
gotten away with it.
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. Nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this backdoor fall for something. Doesn't mean you're safe. Like, you have to do, I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
And it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill like was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly like this is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
Break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. He cleaned up on all his own customers, just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable. Was going to undo sort of everything. Like, if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're a guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode, and he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? Like, how?
That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success.
What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through. He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for.
People that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam.
Regulators, when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like what could they have possibly done to make it easy? Go back to making money again?
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new. Fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. You know, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, outright, the proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of where's the money? I don't know, but he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put the
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16, fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt, and he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative. The money system has to be safe. Like, your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like,
Yeah.
or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to... I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had...
Don't really understand what's going... Like, the FTX thing, for example, is the best one. Because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all...
You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this, and I started, like, seeing it. I'm like, oh, my gosh, this is so interesting. Everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected
party.
That's right, but...
Also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah.
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like, service that said, you cannot move, like, when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So collateral, like, dollars or like some asset will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin, and that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. He launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas, we're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to do like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. Of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big like kind of scam everything. I don't have access to the book. Like I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, "Where's the money?" He goes, "Well, I don't know." It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda this thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time he's like, well, like think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. So the person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But now you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's a person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
and why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time,
it was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too. What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch and then in Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of two Harvard lawyers. It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay.
One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their gay. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no. Basically, they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So hey, you're going to be the guy. Like or something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're not on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks,
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to, he's doing interviews with that, is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all.
Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone.
His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is, it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically, it's almost impossible to trace.
The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse, the things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish
Washington, and I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like, it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be
easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that.
What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? There was a lot of fear of missing out or FOMO in the markets at the time. You know, everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now, after the fact, he's like, still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. Each of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative. You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on chain all our.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
that's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it. And it's amazing.
People, the account, fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured.
Binance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs, and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. So CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know, whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. I start hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is
figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already. I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit, but I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter Space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that don't invest. Like that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few
money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners, like, and you won this round or you won the war
because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to move it. That's what FTX. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. It is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So...
and then when you have them on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and...
You think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth... X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world. and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines is like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness, all. And ultimately, one of the ways, like even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were like donating through them for like all these to expose. But like I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about, and that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like fight, like one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party of ads, like get rich quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis telling you, they're like 25 years old telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million from the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's just like it's almost to something worse. There are at the end when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me on. Let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, it's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I studied, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been. You're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat. They've recently been shut down. But the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better
tease for a while? But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers, and I wanted somebody to said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan, so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating, so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that deal, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people had 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that, like, there's nothing here. But the problem is that it
wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful, that you're just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. So like the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. He'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal. I, too, am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I just put my money
so is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist. You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash. You it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like, and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US was.
Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? I just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch. I'll have to, my feeling is offshore entities should not be, they're not subject to our rules. How can you allow offshore, I don't know. It's a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer.
Each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like, it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like, Sam was just hopped up on amphetamine. Everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give, this stuff went down. And a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of, and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. This big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but, right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. Sam goes, oh, you won, like, our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? Lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
Executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Sam balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. It's you find that her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like, one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. a bunch of people are putting one Ethereum and located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it.
Right.
It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all the... Yeah, tokens like is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. Like, actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore this stuff. And you start to have repeat occurrences. Like I just cover stuff all the time and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago, I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at. And he said, but like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why are not having sort of like it's maybe not big enough? They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Success, 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month, 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this.
It's amazing that things